Elijah Brooks was 41 years old when his ex-wife handed him what she believed was the final humiliation. The invitation was cream-colored, expensive-looking, and addressed to Elijah Brooks and plus one, with a handwritten note at the bottom that read, "No pressure if that's not where you are right now." Totally understandable, given everything. Patricia had built her entire new life on one assumption, that the man she left was still exactly where she left him, diminished, alone, too devoted and too quiet to ever become anything she would have to reckon with. What she did not know was that the man she drained of $214,000, his father's house, his inheritance, 3 years of his life, had spent every month since the divorce building something she could not have imagined. And on the night of her engagement party, surrounded by every person whose opinion she had ever curated, that door opened. The room went still. Patricia's champagne flute stopped halfway to her lips, and the smile she had been wearing all evening slowly stopped working. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The hospital chair had molded perfectly to Elijah's shape, the vinyl worn smooth in places where he sat for countless hours over the past 3 years, his legal pad balanced on his knee as he meticulously reorganized Patricia's medication schedule, his engineer's mind breaking down the complex symphony of pills and treatments into clear, manageable patterns. "Good morning, Mr. Brooks." Sarah, the day shift nurse, greeted him with a warm smile as she checked Patricia's vitals. "You're here early today." "Morning, Sarah." "How's Jamie doing with his college applications?" Elijah asked, not looking up from his notes but genuinely interested. He knew all the nurses' stories, their children's names, their vacation plans, their small daily victories and struggles. He was the only husband on the floor who remembered these details. Sarah updated him on her son's college prospects while she worked, and Elijah made appropriate, encouraging responses. This was his routine now, as familiar as the structural calculations he used to spend his days on before the diagnosis changed everything. 9 years ago, he had married Patricia in a small church ceremony. They had been good together at first. She supported his dreams of building his own structural engineering consultancy, and he admired her marketing savvy. They had settled into a comfortable rhythm over the years, even as they gradually spent more time in parallel rather than together. Then came the day Patricia's doctor diagnosed stage 2 lymphoma, and Elijah's carefully planned world tilted on its axis. His consultancy had been gaining momentum. High-profile clients, complex projects that challenged his expertise in identifying structural weaknesses and engineering elegant solutions. But when Patricia got sick, there was no question. He scaled back his hours, referred his biggest clients to colleagues, and devoted himself to managing her care. The nurses had been shocked at first by his detailed tracking systems, spreadsheets monitoring medication timing, side effects, and treatment responses. But that was how Elijah's mind worked. He approached Patricia's illness like one of his engineering projects, methodically, thoroughly, leaving no detail unchecked. The memory of his father's final week still ached, a quiet bruise he carried beneath his ribs. Patricia had been having a particularly severe reaction to her treatment protocol, and Elijah couldn't leave her side. By the time she stabilized enough for him to make the 3-hour drive to his father's hospital, it was too late. He had missed saying goodbye to the man who taught him everything about integrity and perseverance. Selling his father's house had been the hardest decision. The modest 2-story home represented everything his parents had worked for. His father's pride in owning something outright, in leaving a legacy for his son. But when Patricia's oncologist recommended an experimental treatment protocol that insurance wouldn't cover, Elijah signed the papers. $214,000, every penny of his inheritance, gone to give his wife a fighting chance. He didn't complain. Complaining wouldn't change anything. Instead, He organized medication schedules, insurance appeals, payment plans, appointment calendars. He stayed because that's what you did when you made vows. That's what his father would have done. Your wife's labs came back normal again, Sarah mentioned as she finished her checks. That's 3 months in a row. Elijah nodded, making a note in his pad. Everything documented, everything tracked. He stayed until Patricia woke up, discussed the day's schedule with her, then headed home to shower and change before his abbreviated workday. The house was quiet when he walked in, afternoon sun slanting through the kitchen windows. A plastic pharmacy bag sat on the counter, receipt stapled neatly to the top. Elijah reached for it automatically. Managing prescriptions was second nature now, but paused when he saw the unfamiliar pharmacy name, Cross Creek Pharmacy. That was clear across town, nearly 40 minutes away. He opened the bag. Inside was a single bottle of women's multivitamins. Just vitamins, from a pharmacy 40 minutes away, when their regular pharmacy was 6 blocks from their house. Elijah stood at the counter holding the bag. The receipt showed a timestamp from yesterday afternoon, when Patricia had said she was too fatigued from treatment to leave her bed. Something cold and quiet settled in his chest as he stared at the proof of this small, inexplicable lie. He set the bag down carefully, precisely, his engineer's mind already beginning to trace this crack to its source. The desk lamp cast a small circle of light in the pre-dawn darkness, illuminating the pharmacy receipt Elijah had spread flat before him. His calendar lay open beside it, each day's events logged in his precise handwriting. The house was quiet, except for the soft hum of the heating system and Patricia's distant breathing from their bedroom upstairs. 4:47 a.m. He'd been sitting here since 3:30, methodically comparing dates and times. The receipt showed 2:34 p.m. on Tuesday. His calendar entry for that same afternoon was clear. Patricia, severe fatigue from morning treatment. Sleeping 1 p.m., 6 p.m. He had brought her tea at 5:15, and she'd been in bed, exactly where she said she'd been all afternoon. Except she hadn't been. Elijah sat back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. The inconsistency was small, just a receipt, just vitamins. But in his profession, small inconsistencies often pointed to larger structural problems. A hairline crack could indicate a failing foundation. He had built his career on paying attention to details others missed. He opened his laptop, the screen's blue glow joining the desk lamp's yellow circle. His email inbox contained years of correspondence with Dr. Marcus Chen, Patricia's oncologist, or rather, emails to Dr. Chen's office that were always answered by his staff. Now that he thought about it, despite dozens of scheduled appointments, he had never actually met Dr. Chen in person. There had always been a reason: emergency surgery, schedule changes, resident physicians covering. Elijah opened a new email and addressed it to James Morton, a former colleague who now worked in medical records compliance for the state's largest healthcare network. The email was carefully worded, professional. James, hope you're well. Quick compliance question regarding patient record verification protocols. What's the standard procedure for confirming active patient status with a specific physician? Dealing with some insurance documentation that requires verification. Appreciate any guidance. He included Dr. Chen's name and office details in a casual postscript, as though it were simply an example. Then he waited. The response came 3 days later, while Elijah was sitting in his truck in the parking garage of his office building. The message was brief, but it shattered the world. Eli ran the verification through our system. No record of a Patricia Brooks as a patient with Dr. Chen's practice, current or historical. Checked against insurance claims too. No treatments billed through that office for your wife. Something's not right here. Call me if you need to talk. Attached was an official record search result. Empty. No patient history. No treatment protocols. Nothing. Elijah sat in his truck, hands resting on the steering wheel, and watched the digital clock on his dashboard tick forward. 2:17 p.m. became 3:04 p.m. 47 minutes passed in complete stillness, while his mind catalogued implications with mechanical precision. The private treatment protocol he had funded, $214,000 from his father's house, had never been administered. The doctor's signature on Patricia's initial diagnosis paperwork, the document that had started everything, was a forgery. The weekly appointments, the medication schedules, the side effects he had tracked so carefully, all fabricated. She had never been sick. The realization settled into his bones with the weight of steel girders. His phone buzzed twice, a text from Patricia asking about dinner. With movements that felt automatic, disconnected from the vacuum in his chest, he started his truck and drove home. He cooked chicken marsala, Patricia's favorite. She sat at their kitchen island and told him about her day, a new meditation app that was helping with her recovery fatigue, plans for coffee with her friend Susan next week. Elijah nodded in the right places, asked appropriate questions, and watched her eat food he had prepared with hands that wanted to shake but didn't. After Patricia went to bed, Elijah moved through the house with silent efficiency. He photographed everything: the original diagnosis paperwork, treatment invoices, insurance correspondence, prescription records. Each document represented a different strand of the fiction she had woven around him. He transferred the photos to an encrypted drive, then closed his laptop. In the dark of his home office, Elijah sat without moving. The grief would come later. For his father's house, for the years lost, for the man he had been before all this. But right now, he had work to do. The morning light crept through the kitchen windows as Elijah moved through his familiar routine. Coffee maker humming, calendar open on the counter, car keys in their designated bowl. He had been awake since 4 a.m., but his movements were unhurried, deliberate. Upstairs, Patricia still slept. He poured coffee into his travel mug, the same one he'd used every workday for the past 3 years. The normalcy of the motion felt surreal now, like watching someone else's hands perform familiar tasks. His wedding ring caught the early light as he screwed on the lid. The sound of Patricia stirring upstairs didn't alter his rhythm. He continued reviewing his schedule for the day, pen moving across the page with the same precise strokes as always. When she appeared in her robe, he looked up with the same quiet smile he'd worn every morning of their marriage. "Early meeting?" she asked, reaching for her own coffee mug. "Structural assessment on the Harrison project," he replied, the lie settling easily between them. In truth, he was meeting with Sarah Chen, no relation to the fictional Dr. Chen, a divorce attorney recommended by a colleague who valued discretion. Over the next 3 weeks, Elijah maintained his routine with mechanical precision. Coffee, calendar, keys. He attended Patricia's fictional appointments, took notes during conversations with nurses who didn't exist, and documented medication schedules for drugs that were never prescribed. Each careful record added another layer to the evidence he was building. In his office downtown, Sarah Chen helped him construct a different kind of architecture. They identified his consultancy's most valuable contracts, the ones that would generate sustainable revenue for years, and quietly transferred them to a new corporate entity. On paper, it appeared Elijah was walking away with nothing but his personal belongings and a failing business. Patricia grew looser, more careless, reading his quiet compliance as surrender. She started coming home at irregular hours, offering vague explanations about support group meetings or therapy sessions. Sometimes she didn't explain at all. Elijah noticed the new perfume, the changed passwords on her phone, the lunch charges at restaurants far from her usual spots. He documented everything with the same methodical attention he'd once given to her treatment schedules. The divorce conversation happened on a Tuesday evening. Patricia had prepared for it. He could tell by the way she'd positioned herself at the kitchen island, hands wrapped around a mug of tea, face arranged in an expression of practiced concern. "I think we need to talk," she began. Elijah set down his work papers and gave her his full attention. He had been waiting for this moment, had rehearsed his reactions carefully. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she continued, "about everything we've been through. The illness, the recovery." She paused, watching his face. "Sometimes surviving something like that changes you, makes you see things differently." He nodded, encouraging her to continue. "I need to find myself again, Eli. After being sick for so long, after depending on you for everything." Her voice softened with practiced emotion. "You've been so good to me. Too good. But I need space," he finished quietly. "Yes." Relief flooded her features. He was making this easy for her. "I think we should divorce. Make it clean, start fresh." Elijah sat in silence for exactly 4 seconds, then nodded slowly. "If that's what you need." She reached across the counter and squeezed his hand. "You're such a good man, Eli. You deserve someone who can give you more than I can right now." Over the next 2 weeks, Patricia presented him with papers prepared by her attorney. Elijah signed each document without argument, his signature flowing across pages that had been carefully reviewed by Sarah Chen weeks before. Patricia took his compliance as confirmation of what she'd always believed about him, that he was fundamentally passive, that his quiet nature meant weakness. On a Saturday morning, Patricia loaded the last of her bags into her car. She had taken most of the furniture, the art they'd collected together, anything of significant value. Elijah helped her carry boxes, maintaining his role until the final moment. "Take care of yourself," she said, touching his arm one last time before sliding into the driver's seat. He stood in the driveway until her car disappeared around the corner. Then he walked back inside, closed the door, and turned the deadbolt with a decisive click. The house felt cavernous in its emptiness. Elijah lowered himself to the floor, back against the solid wood of the door, and set a timer on his phone for 60 seconds. For the first time in 3 years, he allowed himself to be completely still. The air felt lighter in his lungs, as though a weight had lifted from his chest. When the timer chimed, he picked up his phone and began dialing numbers. Each call was brief, precise, setting in motion the machinery he had carefully assembled. The first number was Sarah Chen's. 8 months after signing the divorce papers, Elijah stood before a federal infrastructure panel, his presentation materials organized with characteristic precision. The conference room overlooked the Washington Monument through floor-to-ceiling windows, but his focus remained on the blueprints spread across the table. The structural reinforcement design allows for a 50% increase in load capacity while reducing material costs by 30%, he explained, his voice steady and confident. "We've implemented similar solutions in 3 municipal projects, all completed ahead of schedule and under budget." The panel members, senior officials from the Department of Transportation and Housing Development, leaned forward, studying the innovative design approach. Among them sat Camille Ashford, founder of Ashford Infrastructure Solutions. She asked targeted questions about implementation timelines and resource allocation, each query revealing a deep understanding of both the technical and practical challenges. After the presentation, as other panel members filed out, Camille lingered. "Your approach to the support structure integration is interesting," she said, pointing to a specific detail in the blueprints. "I haven't seen anyone solve that particular problem quite that way before." Elijah explained his reasoning, and they fell into an easy technical discussion that lasted well past the scheduled meeting time. He noticed how quickly she grasped complex concepts, how she anticipated his next points before he made them. Her laughter, when it came, was genuine, responding to the dry engineering humor that usually fell flat with others. Over the next few months, their paths crossed regularly through the federal contract work. Camille would stop by his office to review project details, and their conversations gradually extended beyond blueprints and timelines. She mentioned her brother Victor's law practice, her favorite coffee shop in Georgetown, the novel she was reading. Elijah shared stories about growing up in Virginia, about his mother, Gloria's garden, about the structural engineering problems that kept him up at night. He noticed her guardedness, how she evaluated people's motivations, how carefully she managed information about herself. But with him, those barriers seemed to lower naturally over time. She relaxed into their conversations, spoke more freely about her experiences building her company from scratch. What Elijah didn't know, couldn't have known, was that Camille's caution came from years of being approached as a resource rather than a person. Men saw her company's federal contracts, her Forbes profile, her net worth. They crafted careful strategies to get close to her. But Elijah just saw her sharp mind, her quiet determination, her unexpected humor. 4 months into working together, they had dinner at a small Italian restaurant in Alexandria. Camille watched him solve a structural problem on a napkin, completely absorbed in the work, and realized he still had no idea who she was in the broader business world. When he finally looked up from his impromptu calculations, she was smiling. "What?" he asked. "Nothing," she said. "Just, it's nice to be seen as a person first." Their relationship developed with the same quiet certainty that characterized everything Elijah did. No grand gestures, no public declarations, just two people recognizing something rare and valuable in each other. When he finally learned about her company's true scope and her personal wealth, it was through a casual mention in a trade publication. He set the magazine down and continued their conversation about weekend plans without missing a beat. The wedding was exactly what they both wanted: small, private, meaningful. Gloria cried during the ceremony, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. Victor gave a toast that was equal parts legal precision and genuine warmth. No press, no industry networking, no performance for others' benefit. That evening, they sat at their kitchen table, still in their wedding clothes, sharing take-out Chinese food from their favorite local place. The house was quiet, except for the soft clink of chopsticks and the hum of the refrigerator. Light from the setting sun filtered through the windows, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors. Camille reached across the table and covered Elijah's hand with hers. Without hesitation, he turned his palm upward and interlaced their fingers, holding on with quiet certainty. The cream-colored envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, mixed in with bills and advertisements. Elijah sorted through the mail at the kitchen counter, Camille's voice drifting in from her home office where she was on a conference call. The envelope was thick, the paper clearly expensive. His name and address were printed in elegant script: Elijah Brooks, and +1. He recognized Patricia's taste immediately. She had always been particular about stationery, about the visual weight of important communications. He opened it carefully, sliding his finger under the sealed flap. The invitation inside matched the envelope's quality: heavy cardstock, letterpress printing, gold foil accents catching the morning light from the kitchen window. Together with their families, it read, Patricia Hargrove and Douglas Fenn request the pleasure of your company at their engagement celebration. He noted Patricia's return to her maiden name, a deliberate choice, like everything else about the invitation. The party details followed: date, time, venue, an upscale hotel downtown known for hosting society events. Then, at the bottom, in Patricia's distinctive handwriting, the looping script he'd seen on countless notes and cards over their years together, was a personal message. "Hope you can make it, Eli. And please, do bring someone if you have them. No pressure at all if that's not where you are right now. Totally understandable given everything. We just want you to feel comfortable." Elijah read it once, his expression unchanging. He set the invitation down on the counter and walked to the back porch, letting the screen door close softly behind him. The morning air was cool, birds chattering in the maple tree that shaded the yard. He pulled out his phone and called his mother. Gloria answered on the second ring. "Good morning, baby." "Morning, Mama." He paused, then said, "Got an invitation today. From Patricia. She's getting married." He heard his mother's slow intake of breath. "Let me read you something." He recited the handwritten note word for word, his voice steady and controlled. Gloria was quiet for a long moment. Then, with the controlled restraint of a woman who had been biting her tongue for 9 years, she said, "She wrote that on purpose." "I know, Mama." "You going?" Elijah looked out at the yard, watching a cardinal land on the bird feeder he'd hung last weekend. He thought about the parking garage where he'd first learned the truth. He thought about the photograph still in the box he hadn't unpacked. His father in front of his house, the summer before he died. "Yeah," he said. "We're going." "Good." Gloria's voice held quiet satisfaction. "You let me know what you need." He ended the call and stood there for another minute, letting the morning settle around him. Through the screen door, he could hear that Camille's call had ended. He went back inside. She was in the kitchen where he'd left her, coffee mug in hand. She glanced up as he entered, her expression open and attentive. Without speaking, he slid the invitation across the counter toward her. Camille set down her mug and picked up the card. She read the invitation first, then the handwritten note at the bottom. Her face remained perfectly composed, not because she had no reaction, but because Camille Ashford Brooks had never needed her expressions to announce what she had already decided. She set the card back down on the counter with the same precise movement she used in board meeting. Then she looked at Elijah and asked simply, "What time does it start?" "7," he said. She picked up her coffee again, took a careful sip. "We'll need to go shopping," she said. "Not for me. I have something. For you." She studied him with the same focused attention she brought to major acquisitions. "You're not walking in there in anything less than exactly right." 2 days after the invitation arrived, Elijah's phone rang while he was reviewing structural plans in his home office. Gloria's name lit up the screen. He answered immediately. His mother never called during work hours unless it mattered. "Baby, I need to tell you something," Gloria said. Her voice carried a weight he recognized, the tone she used when she'd been weighing whether to speak. "What is it, Mama?" "You remember Sarah from my Wednesday prayer group? She called me this morning about something Dottie Hargrove said at the church luncheon yesterday." Gloria paused, choosing her words carefully. "You know how Dottie talks. Everything's a story with her. She was going on about Patricia's engagement, telling everyone how happy she is for her niece." Elijah sat back in his chair, waiting. His mother didn't traffic in gossip. If she was sharing this, there was a reason. Then Dottie said something strange. She mentioned how Patricia's little health scare had worked out fine because she had a good friend in the right office. Those were her exact words, Elijah. Sarah caught it right away. She remembered what you went through, what we all thought we were going through. Elijah's hand tightened on the phone. "Did Dottie say anything else about this friend?" "That's why I waited to call you. I did some asking around first." Gloria's voice steadied, becoming precise. "Patricia worked at MedBill Solutions before you married her. Had a close friend there named Jenny Marshall who handled physician documentation. This woman had access to everything. Letterhead, signature stamps, billing codes. She still works there." The implications settled into Elijah's chest like cold lead. "How long ago did Patricia work there?" "She left 6 months before your wedding." Gloria let that sink in. "Elijah, she didn't come up with this when things got bad. She had this connection, this whole plan, before you even said your vows. She married you, knowing exactly what she was going to do." Elijah looked at the photo on his desk. Him and Camille on their wedding day, both of them smiling real smiles. Then he thought about his first wedding photos, wondering how many of Patricia's smiles had been genuine and how many had been performance. "There's more," Gloria continued. "Dottie mentioned that Patricia and Jenny still meet for lunch sometimes. Last time was about 2 months before you found out the truth. Dottie saw them at that little cafe near the medical center." Elijah opened his laptop and began taking notes, his engineer's precision taking over. Names, dates, locations. Thank you for telling me, Mama. I'll handle it from here. I know you will, baby. That's why I waited until I had something solid. After ending the call, Elijah immediately dialed Victor Ashford's office number. Camille's brother picked up on the first ring. Victor, I need to retain you formally. Are you free this afternoon? An hour later, Elijah sat across from Victor in his downtown office, laying out everything: the encrypted photos of the forged documents, Gloria's information about Jenny Marshall, the timeline of Patricia's employment at MedBill Solutions. Victor listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes in a leather-bound portfolio. The documentation you preserved helps significantly, Victor said when Elijah finished. Combined with this new information about her medical billing connection, we can establish premeditation. This wasn't just fraud, it was constructed fraud with clear intent. What do you need from me? Victor opened his laptop. I'm going to pull financial records first, both Patricia's and this Jenny Marshall's. If they were meeting regularly, there might be payment traces. Even small ones matter. Lunch receipts, coffee meetings, everything builds the pattern. He looked up at Elijah. How soon do you need this compiled? The engagement party is in 3 weeks. Victor nodded, understanding immediately. I'll have preliminary findings by the end of the week. Full documentation before the party. He studied Elijah's face. You're sure you want to do it there? Yes. Elijah's voice was quiet but firm. That's where she chose to make it public. That's where she'll learn what public really means. Victor made another note. 2 questions from you. Then we get started. First, can you prove the money from my father's house went directly to her condo down payment? If it did, we'll find it. Bank records don't lie. Victor looked up. Second question, how solid does the documentation need to be for a civil recovery claim? The call from Victor came on a Wednesday morning, exactly 1 week before the party. His voice carried the particular weight of someone who had found what they were looking for and wished they hadn't. Can you come to the office? I've finished the financial review. When Elijah arrived, Victor's desk was covered in organized stacks of documentation. Bank statements, property records, and transaction histories laid out in precise chronological order. Victor gestured to the chair across from him. You should sit for this, he said, reaching for the nearest folder. I traced every dollar from your father's house sale. The full amount was $214,000. The initial transfer went to what looked like a medical billing account, but that account was registered to a shell company controlled by Jenny Marshall, Patricia's contact at MedBill Solutions. Elijah nodded, his face carefully neutral. And from there? Victor opened the folder. The money moved through 3 separate accounts over 8 days. Then it split into 2 streams. He placed a document in front of Elijah. The first stream, $165,000, went directly into escrow for a down payment on a condo at the Ashworth. Property records show Patricia purchased it 14 months before she asked for the divorce. She used her maiden name on the paperwork. The precision of the timeline hit Elijah in the chest. 14 months before the divorce meant she had bought the condo while he was still spending his days in that hospital chair, reorganizing her medication schedule and coordinating with nurses who didn't exist. The remaining $49,000 funded what I can only describe as preparation, Victor continued, spreading out more documents. High-end furniture deposits, travel bookings through a luxury service, season tickets to the symphony. Just 1 seat, not 2. She was building a life, Elijah. Just not with you. Elijah studied the papers, his engineer's mind automatically organizing the data into a timeline. While he was liquidating his father's estate to fund what he thought was life-saving treatment, Patricia was selecting furniture for a condo he didn't know existed. I've prepared 2 sets of documentation, Victor said, indicating a thick folder on the corner of his desk. The first is everything. Every transaction, every shell account, every connection between Jenny Marshall and Patricia. That's for the civil recovery claim we'll file after the party. The second set is a precise summary. Just the key evidence linking your father's house money directly to her condo and lifestyle purchases. That's what we'll bring to the party. You're certain about the numbers? Elijah asked, though he already knew the answer. Victor Ashford didn't present findings unless they were ironclad. Every dollar is accounted for. Every transaction documented. She sold you a story about dying so she could afford to leave. Victor's voice carried rare emotion. The civil claim will be substantial. The condo, the furniture, all of it. We can prove it was purchased with fraudulently obtained funds. Elijah stood, straightening his jacket. Thank you, Victor. I'll see you next week. That evening, Elijah continued packing boxes for the move into the home he now shared with Camille. She was working late, and the quiet of the house allowed him to sort through years of accumulated life with methodical focus. In the back of the closet, he found a box he hadn't opened since before Patricia's diagnosis. Inside, beneath old tax returns and warranty papers, was a manila envelope of photographs. He knew what he would find before he opened it. The photo was exactly as he remembered. His father standing in front of the house on a bright summer day, one hand resting on the porch railing he had rebuilt himself. The pride in his stance was visible even through the faded color of the print. This was a man who had built something solid, something meant to last. The house in the photograph wasn't extraordinary, a well-maintained two-story in a good neighborhood, but it represented everything his father had achieved. Every mortgage payment, every repair, every improvement had been earned through honest work, and Elijah had sold it to fund a lie. He studied his father's face in the photograph, remembering the final phone call from the hospice nurse. He had been at the hospital with Patricia during what she claimed was a severe treatment reaction. By the time he arrived at hospice, his father was gone. Elijah held the photograph for a long time, letting the weight of everything it represented settle into his bones. Then, with careful deliberation, he folded it and walked to the closet where his suit hung ready for next week's party. He slipped the photograph into the breast pocket, smoothing it flat against the fabric. The Ashworth Club's ballroom glowed with carefully curated warmth, crystal chandeliers casting soft light over cream-colored tablecloths and strategic flower arrangements in muted golds and whites. Every detail had been selected to communicate arrival, to transform an engagement party into a statement about who Patricia Hargrove had become. Elijah stood just inside the entrance, taking in the scene with the measured assessment of a structural engineer. The room was laid out to create natural sightlines to wherever Patricia stood, a subtle architectural reminder of who this evening was designed to celebrate. She was across the room now, radiant in a fitted cream dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payments, holding court near the center tables with a champagne flute, balanced elegantly between manicured fingers. He recognized her performance, the careful tilt of her head as she listened, the practiced laugh that carried just far enough to draw attention without seeming to seek it. She had perfected these movements years ago, and he had watched her deploy them at countless dinner parties before the diagnosis that wasn't a diagnosis changed everything. Douglas stood beside her, one hand resting possessively at the small of her back, pride evident in his stance. He didn't know yet. He was still living inside the story Patricia had constructed for him. A server passed with a tray of champagne. Elijah declined with a small shake of his head, preferring to keep his hands free. He had chosen his position carefully, visible from where Patricia stood, but not immediately demanding her attention. He knew she had already noticed him. He knew she would approach on her own timeline when she had arranged her face and selected her words. It took less than 3 minutes. He watched her catch sight of him, watched the satisfaction settle into her features, subtle enough that only someone who had known her for years would recognize it. This was the moment she had designed when she wrote that note at the bottom of the invitation. The diminished ex-husband attending her triumph alone, exactly as she had predicted. She excused herself from her group with practiced grace, lifting 2 fresh champagne flutes from a passing server as she crossed the room. Her smile was calibrated for the audience around them, warm, generous, the smile of a woman who had survived something difficult and emerged stronger. She had told that story so many times it had become muscle memory. "Eli," she said, extending one of the flutes toward him. "I'm so glad you could make it." Her voice carried just enough sympathy to make the words sting if he had been the man she thought he was. He accepted the champagne with a genuine smile that seemed to unsettle her slightly. "Wouldn't have missed it," he said. And he meant it. Her eyes drifted to the empty space beside him, a small, deliberate glance that confirmed everything her handwritten note had implied. He had come alone, just as she expected, just as she had intended when she addressed that envelope to Elijah Brooks and +1. "The room looks beautiful," he said, before she could shape her practiced concern into words. The Ashworth was a perfect choice. Something flickered across her face at the mention of the Ashworth, a micro-expression so brief anyone else would have missed it. But Elijah had spent years studying Patricia's tells, and he saw the moment she tried to remember if she had ever mentioned the venue's name to him. Before she could respond, the door opened behind him. He didn't turn around. He didn't need to. He felt the shift in the room's energy, the subtle change in atmospheric pressure that happened when Camille Ashford Brooks entered a space. The conversations nearest the door stuttered and reset. Heads turned. Whispers started. Patricia noticed the attention first, the way the closest groups had gone quiet, the way people were looking past her toward the entrance. Then she registered who had caused it. Then she saw Elijah move, with the easy confidence of practice, to stand beside the woman everyone in the room was trying not to stare at. Camille wore deep blue, a color that shouldn't have commanded attention, but somehow did. Her presence wasn't engineered like Patricia's. It simply was. She moved through the space like someone who had never needed to convince a room she belonged in it. Elijah turned back to Patricia, whose champagne flute had gone still in her hand. He kept his voice warm, calm, pitched to carry exactly as far as necessary and no further. "I brought my +1, he said. "This is my wife, Camille." The word wife landed like a stone in still water. Patricia's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: disbelief, recognition, calculation, and something deeper that looked almost like fear. Her carefully curated moment was realigning itself around her, and for the first time in years, she had no script prepared. Douglas had been watching Patricia since the moment Camille walked in. His eyes hadn't left her face, tracking the subtle shifts in her expression that most people would miss. Now he moved across the room with the measured stride of someone who had built his career on projecting authority in social spaces. Elijah recognized the walk. He had seen it countless times in development meetings and contract negotiations. It was the gait of a man who had never questioned his right to be the most important person in any room he entered. Douglas approached their small group, champagne in hand, his smile carrying just enough edge to signal that he was choosing to be gracious, rather than threatened. "So this is the famous ex-husband," Douglas said, extending his free hand toward Elijah. "Can't say I expected to see you here. Most men would have found something else to do tonight." The words landed somewhere between a joke and a warning, clear enough to establish dominance, casual enough to maintain plausible deniability if challenged. Elijah took the offered hand without hesitation. His grip was firm but not aggressive, the handshake of someone who had nothing to prove. "Couldn't miss it," he said pleasantly, "especially since I wanted to make sure you had the full story about the woman you're marrying." Patricia moved forward slightly, her champagne flute trembling almost imperceptibly. "Douglas, we should really check on the full story." Douglas's smile tightened at the corners. "I think I know my fiancé pretty well." Elijah glanced toward the edge of the room where Victor Ashford stood, briefcase in hand, watching the scene unfold with professional detachment. Victor moved forward at Elijah's subtle nod, his steps unhurried and precise. He reached their group just as Patricia tried again to redirect Douglas's attention. "Darling, the caterers needed to discuss." "Victor Ashford," Victor said, his voice carrying just enough authority to stop Patricia mid-sentence. "Family attorney." He placed his briefcase on the nearest cocktail table and withdrew a thick manila folder. The sound of the folder touching the polished wood seemed unnaturally loud in the sudden quiet that had settled around them. Gloria Brooks, who had slipped in quietly during the commotion of Camille's entrance, now sat at a nearby table. She watched the scene with the calm satisfaction of someone who had waited years for this particular moment. She did not speak. She did not need to. "You'll want to review this before the evening is over," Victor said, sliding the folder toward Douglas. His tone carried no judgment, no emotion at all. Just the professional certainty of someone who knew exactly what the documentation contained. Patricia's hand shot out, trying to catch Douglas's arm. "This is ridiculous. They're trying to ruin our evening. We don't need to." But Douglas was already reaching for the folder. Something in Victor's tone had caught his attention. The quiet confidence of it, perhaps, or the complete lack of dramatic flourish. He opened the cover as Patricia's fingers slipped from his sleeve. The conversations nearest their group had gone silent. Other guests were beginning to notice, their attention drawn by the unusual tableau. The groom-to-be standing over a cocktail table, the bride-to-be frozen beside him, a distinguished-looking attorney watching without expression as pages turned. Patricia remained perfectly still, her champagne flute suspended halfway to her lips, her eyes fixed on Douglas's face. She watched the changes move across his features like weather, confusion giving way to focus, focus hardening into understanding, understanding deepening into something darker with each page he turned. The folder contained organization tabs, clearly labeled. Douglas paused at each one, his movements becoming more deliberate as he progressed. The room around them had grown so quiet that the sound of papers shifting seemed to fill the space. Camille stood beside Elijah, her presence steady and unrushed. She did not need to watch Douglas read. Her attention stayed on Patricia, measuring each micro-expression that crossed the other woman's face as her carefully constructed world began to shift beneath her feet. Gloria remained seated, hands folded in her lap, watching it all with the particular patience of a mother who had waited 9 years to see truth find its moment. Douglas closed the folder with careful precision, his fingers lingering on the edge as if needing something solid to hold on to. He lifted his gaze first to Patricia, and in that moment of eye contact something final passed between them. Not anger, not even disappointment, just recognition. Then he turned to Elijah, waiting. The room had gone completely still. Even the background music seemed to have faded away, though no one had touched the volume. Patricia's champagne flute trembled slightly in her hand, the only movement in her otherwise frozen posture. Elijah spoke in a voice that carried without effort, not raised, not strained, but clear enough that everyone nearby could hear each word. He had prepared for this moment over many careful months, and his tone reflected that preparation, measured, factual, unchanged by emotion. $214,000, he said. That's what my father's house sold for. The house he spent 30 years paying off. The money went through a shell account set up to look like medical payments. From there, it went to 2 places. The down payment on a condo on Highland Avenue, purchased 14 months before she filed for divorce, and a series of personal expenses that had nothing to do with cancer treatments. Patricia's composure cracked. "These documents are obviously fabricated," she said, her voice rising slightly. This is what he does, Douglas. He couldn't handle that I got better, that I moved on. He's trying to—" "The condo is in your name only," Douglas said quietly, cutting through her words. "I've seen the deed. You never mentioned owning property. You don't understand." Patricia turned to the guests nearest them, her eyes seeking the sympathy she had cultivated so carefully over years of telling her survival story. "This is exactly what I went through before. He wasn't there for me during my illness. He couldn't accept." "There was no illness." Gloria's voice came from her seated position, calm and clear as a bell. Elijah reached into his breast pocket and withdrew the photograph he had carried since finding it in that box. He placed it carefully on the table beside the folder. The image was sun-faded but clear. A man standing proudly in front of a modest two-story house, his smile warm and genuine. "That's my father," Elijah said, in front of his house, 2 years before she sold it. The silence deepened. Patricia's appeals died in her throat, as several guests who had heard her tell the cancer survival story multiple times began to step back slightly, creating distance. Elijah picked up his champagne glass. He turned to Douglas, and his voice carried no anger, only the genuine wish that another man might avoid what he had endured. "Thank you for the party," he said. "I honestly hope you have better luck than I did." He extended his hand to Camille, who took it without hesitation. They moved toward the exit together, their steps unhurried. Gloria rose from her seat and followed, her head high, her expression peaceful. Victor collected the folder with professional efficiency, tucking it back into his briefcase before making his own quiet exit. 14 months passed like water. Elijah's consultancy grew through the Federal Housing Initiative partnership with Camille's firm. His name appeared prominently on project documentation, his vision helping shape developments that would last generations. Patricia and Douglas never married. He ended their engagement 20 days after the party. Once his own attorney confirmed every document in Victor's folder was legitimate. The civil proceedings initiated through Victor's office continued steadily forward, with the Highland Avenue condo now subject to a recovery claim. Patricia moved in with her mother in the suburbs. Her carefully constructed narrative about survival and renewal became impossible to maintain in the social circles where she had once told it so effectively. The truth had a way of traveling, carried on the same networks that once passed along her other story. On a quiet Tuesday afternoon in November, Elijah stood at his father's grave. The autumn air was crisp and clear. He placed his hand on the cool stone and stood in silence, feeling the weight of everything that had changed and everything that remained constant. He had a meeting scheduled in an hour, a final review of the housing initiative's next phase. His name would be on those documents too. He walked back to his car without hurry. He was not late. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.